Folks, if you are an Apple investor, there's only one thing that could have eased the concern over the health of CEO Steve Jobs: a blowout quarter. And that's exactly what you got late yesterday. Apple reported earnings that surpassed expectations by almost every measure. And the stock that started the day in the tank on the news of Jobs' medical leave has, as of this morning, made up almost all of those losses and appears to be headed for yet another record high. Is there any reason left to doubt this company? We're about to find out. From Gene Munster, the Piper Jaffray analyst who has covered Apple for almost a decade and was early to spot the promise of mobile computing. So, Gene, let's start. Is there anything wrong with Apple? Was there anything wrong with this quarter? Is there any weak Achilles heel in this company?
I would love to find one, and you really can't. It was such a good quarter. It was almost comical. Keep in mind, Apple's been blowing out quarters for 7 straight years, and the magnitude of these beats increases. We're raising our numbers this morning by revenue by 11% and EPS by 17%. These are just staggering numbers. This in calendar 12 is going to be a $122 billion company. So I think this just kind of sums it up. This is the 5th consecutive quarter that they've had accelerating revenue growth. Despite the fact this is such a massive company, it grew last night at 71%. And so I think that just sums it up. And you said it, is that mobile really is what's driving it. 56% of their sales are going to be iPhone and iPad, and at least in the last quarter, that's up from 36% a year ago. So really their mobile strategy is just blowing it out.
Gene, you're raising your estimates this morning. You're raising your price target to $483 on the stock. It's currently trading right now at about $345, $346 in the pre-market, and that's up from your previous target of $438. So clearly you're bullish. But the question I have for you is this. Part of your bullishness is on the basis of very aggressive guidance from Apple, perhaps the most aggressive in the company's history. What does that say to you? Does that genuinely speak to Apple's feelings about its prospect, or is Apple trying to neutralize perhaps some of the concerns over Steve Jobs' health with the guidance it issued yesterday?
I mean, that's a fair point, but historically Apple's been very conservative in terms of the guidance they've given. This is the first time in 3 years that they've raised their earnings guidance, so, I mean, it was a very strong indication. A lot of that comes from Verizon. I mean, keep in mind, AT&T is a 12% customer of Apple, and Verizon has the potential to be that size of a customer. Obviously, that's coming online in a couple weeks here, and so I think that the strong guidance really was predicated on the anticipation of what could be just a huge year at Verizon. Okay,
there is going to be some cannibalization, though, there.
There will be, and I guess if you assume AT&T, which is growing at about 60%, the iPhone at AT&T, if you assume that goes flat this year, and Verizon has a similar type of year, you still get some pretty big positive changes to numbers. So the bottom line is, despite cannibalization, this is still a huge positive for Apple having Verizon, and I think that that's really what was been driving some of this good guidance last night.
Gene, that was about as close as Tim Cook got to talking about Steve Jobs and the vision he lends to Apple. Why is it on that conference call that nobody asked about the elephant in the room, Steve Jobs' health, and what his absence is going to mean to the company?
I think the simple reason is that most of the analysts that were on that call that were asking questions realize that it's a topic that you're not going to get a lot of response from Apple. I mean, they've historically, this is the 3rd time we've been through this. Every time you essentially get them reading back what their press release was, and so you only get a couple questions to ask on that call, and I think most analysts probably thought they weren't going to waste it on a question that they weren't going to get an answer.
Okay, good answer, and that helps to explain why things unfolded the way they did, Gene. But the question that everybody is asking himself this morning and yesterday, of course, in light of the news that Jobs is taking medical leave, is, does anybody have the visionary quality to lead Apple into the future? Are you confident? Or, let me rephrase the question. Steve Jobs is responsible for the current product cycle at Apple. How long do you think it can last before Apple needs something new?
Well, I think if the products that Steve Jobs has his hands on now are probably out for the next 2 to 3 years, and so I think that's probably where what's in place. And that's really what my question was trying to get at, is how long that is. But I think the reason why Tim Cook answered the way he did is what he was basically saying is that we don't have a roadmap that Steve put into place, and we're going through that roadmap. I think the reality is that probably is how it is in the near term. But as far as how important Steve Jobs is, the reality is that the collective brain power of Apple probably equals something close to Steve Jobs. The one part that they really miss is just that salesmanship that's the best salesman in the world, and second is just, I think his negotiating power with some of the content owners, and, it's just the intangible factor. But clearly, Steve Jobs is irreplaceable. I think that the roadmap that they have is secure for the next 2 to 3 years, and there's a lot of good talent there that can dream up some other things, too.
Gene, quick question for you. If the product cycle is going to last 2 to 3 years, can Apple do what it's done for the past 4 years, effectively double sales every couple of years? As you said, it's going to be a $120 billion company this year, or in 2012. Can it be a $250 billion company in 2014?
The numbers do get difficult, the simple answer, but I think that this can significantly outpace any tech company.
All right, Gene, thanks very much. A nice, concise answer from Gene Munster on Apple. We're talking about a company that just continues to defy expectations and surprises in light of what's happening with Steve Jobs.